Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome everyone to our Finance Committee meeting. We hope it is a good evening. I would call this meeting to order. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and our schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, we learn, and we live. You have an agenda in front of you. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Seeing none, looking at the agenda, I would like somebody to move the approval of that agenda. Thank you, Vice Chair Edwards. All those in favor? Thank you. Also in front of you, or in your package, you have the meeting notes from May the 27th, last week. We need a motion to approve those minutes. Thank you, Trustee Arsenault. All those in favor? Thank you. Before we actually begin, I'm going to ask Director Williams-Taylor to welcome everybody tonight. Words of welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Morton, and welcome everyone to our Ed Finance meeting. Important meeting as it is. It is our second conversation pertaining to a staff proposed budget. In the first meeting, there were a number of questions that were raised, and I just want to call trustees' attention to the fact that staff have in fact worked on those questions to try to illuminate information to inform your decision. So you will see in Appendix B on page 49 that we have attached the memo that was shared with you to answer some of the questions that were raised in public in our last meeting. And I specifically call attention to page 51 of that in your package, and it's page 3 of 5 of the memo, where a breakdown is provided for how it is that the district actually undertakes the work of equity and Indigenous education. We do look specifically in 5.1 at the breakdown for how we in fact fund and support the work around Indigenous education. And in 5.2, there's a section around how the anti-oppression work is undertaken in the district. Just wanting to highlight that because it's an important piece to set the record straight, if you will, to be clear that where it is that the anti-oppression team was characterized as being a staff of 2 is actually a staff of 12, and so that is broken down in 5.2 with the follow-up behind of the nature of the work that is undertaken both by the Indigenous team and by the anti-oppression team, and in addition other teams that address issues of anti-oppression, equity, Indigenous education, and Indigenous rights. So we're hoping that that adds a level of clarity. Also, we do see at the end of the package there was an effort to break down a little bit further some of the operational impacts of the budget on classrooms and schools at the interest to respond to the interest by trustees. So Chair Morton, thank you for giving me the opportunity just to open with that. And if it is your will, I'm happy to pass it over to Associate Director Wright to get us started as your wish.
I might just offer a thank you because I had my notes here and I say, we thank our director and associate director for including Appendix B in our package for this evening, because in doing so, you have answered many of the questions which the trustees brought forward last week. So I thank you. Associate Director Wright.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Director Williams-Taylor. We appreciated the opportunity last week to hear from some of our partners and appreciated that trustees came prepared to ask us questions about the proposed budget. As Director Williams-Taylor mentioned and Chair Morton just mentioned, you'll note that at Appendix B, we did revisit some of the responses to some of the questions that were asked at our last meeting that we felt we could expand upon. So I'll just touch on those briefly, and then we'll open it to further questions from trustees. So we did follow up Durham Continuing Education on the reduction in funding from the federal government to support the child care minders, the child minder for newcomer Canadian positions, to better understand what the impact would be of the reduction of those positions. At this point, Durham Continuing Education staff do not anticipate that the staffing reduction will be a barrier to access to the program given the level of subscription that DCE has seen for the childminder services over the past months. We wanted to provide a bit more clarity on what is noted in the budget as a reduction of guidance counselors. All secondary schools are retaining their complement of core guidance counselors, and so we want to make that clear. The reductions noted are related to positions that were funded on a short-term basis by the Ministry of Education, specifically to support de-streaming and entry into high school. Point 3, we attempted to provide a different expenditure breakdown that highlighted how resources were being allocated within this budget. You will see that almost 90% of our operating budget is directed to staffing, and the vast majority of the budget directly supports school operations. For some context, we are proposing the addition of about 265 full-time equivalent positions next year. 257 of these positions are school-based supports or direct supports for students. 5 of these positions are positions that will help build teaching capacity in areas like literacy and numeracy and anti-oppressive practice. And 3 positions are central positions that are being proposed to be added to manage increased workload associated with the growth of the organization. The 4th section, we spoke about funding for school councils, but neglected to mention that there are potentially project funds available through the Parents Reaching Out grants that board staff does work closely with PIC in allocating. And the last item in the appendix on district support for work on anti-oppressive practice has already been spoken to quite nicely by Director Williams-Taylor. And so with that, we're happy to be here this evening to address any additional or follow-up questions that trustees have in relation to the proposed budget, and we hope you'll support the motion included in this report this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Associate Director. Do we have comments? Do we have questions? Trustee Linton.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Really appreciate the Appendix B and the time taken to answer some of the main questions. I wish something like this had been done kind of that, kind of in-depth and deep dive into more sections, because it makes it a little easier to understand. So we may be here for a while, because this may be, from me at least, a line by line, what does this mean? What are the implications? Because as stated by one of our presenters last week, we have to know what we're voting on. So I don't think does me or anyone any favors to guess what it is. So I will ask for your indulgence as we go almost line by line for you to explain what some of these pieces mean, so I can vote on it in confidence. So starting with, and I'll ask them in different pieces. So looking at page 21, school management allocation, there was, I guess, an increase of $2,579,844. So if you could explain what that is and how those funds will be utilized. And then right underneath that, there's a differentiated supports allocation and an increase of $2,135,854. Thank you.
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Trustee Linton. Happy to support through this. So the chart on page 21 of your package, page 16 of the budget book, is a summary of our revenues, and the changes noted are largely related to enrollment changes. So the revenue lines don't always directly correlate to expense lines, and so with your indulgence, I'll ask for just a little bit of clarification on what you're looking for.
If you could just let us know what it is, what it means. So brand new, right? So what is school management allocation? What does that do? Where can we see it play out? And same with the differentiated supports allocation. Like, what is it? What is it doing?
So the school management allocation is, and you'll have to forgive us, this is a new grant model for us as well, and so some of the terminology is new to us as well. The school management allocation is intended to provide funding for administration and leadership and related costs in schools, as well as for remote learning instruction. So it is the administrative portion of school operations. School principals, vice principals, etc. The differentiated supports allocation. So, through you, Madam Chair, the definition of the differentiated supports allocation includes demographic, socioeconomic, and other indicators, funding to support those indicators. So this allocation provides funding for program leadership and to support school boards in offering a wide range of programs tailored to local needs of their students. Funding is to address student learning and programming based on demographic, socioeconomic, and other indicators associated with barriers to success. And there are a number of components of this grant. And Trustee Linton, if I can offer, there is a document that has definitions in it that I'm happy to share with you. It used to be called the technical paper. There's actually two versions of this document now. The ministry made some changes to go along with the grant model changes this year to make this more accessible. Understanding education funding is complex. The intention was to provide a more detailed technical document for school board staff, but a more accessible document for families and partners. So I'll happily share those with you, and it'll provide some of the definitions because they are big amounts tied to big lines without a lot of definition.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. My question is similar to Trustee Linton's. I did notice you have language and support, local circumstances, allocation. So if we're looking at last year versus where we're going into 2024 to 2025, that's quite a big leap there. Can you explain or give detail as to that?
I can give you a two-part explanation. One, that amount likely would have gone up because there is funding specifically to support newcomer Canadians that don't come from a country where English is the first language, and we have seen a significant increase in those students registering with our schools. There's also been a grant model change, and so the big bulk of the change going from $600,000 to $9 million associated with the grant model change. So it isn't super clean when the ministry updated the grant model, transitioning from a previous grant to a new grant. So there are additional items included in this grant now and will be going forward.
Sorry, just to clarify one more thing. So when I understand that we have a lot of newcomers and there's language barriers. So this is for teachers, or this is for, like, specifically, if you can break that down as to what in school, I know it's a lot, but just so that I understand, like, that's a significant jump. That's why I'm trying to figure out, are we paying ongoing teachers? Is it for special classes, for language? I just kind of figuring out where that actually is, or what that actually is.
So the revenue in this line will support a number of different staff and a number of different programs. So certainly it will support staffing, English as a second language staffing, both teachers and coaches. French language is also included in this funding line. The geographic component, so there are areas of our district that are more remote than others that receive top-up grants. That's included in here. There's also a significant benefit component. So funding for health and welfare benefits for our staff is included in this line as well. So it's a bit of a mix. They include that as local circumstances funding.
Those are full-time positions then for those staff members?
So there would be a mix of full-time equivalent staffing that are funded out of this line. And I don't know that I have a breakdown of staff specifically funded out of this line, but it would be a mixture of full-time and part-time staff. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Senior Manager Machen probably has a better answer than I do.
Just as we're going through the revenue pieces, I would just draw your attention to pages 23 and 24, because often the reason that the grants increase can touch numerous lines on that schedule. So if you'll turn to page 23 of your package, you can see the very first number I quote there of $32.4 million is as a result of enrollment changes. So enrollment increase would impact the line that we were just looking at, as well as most every other line on this schedule. So it's difficult to give you one reason that a grant would increase when there's multiple factors that change within that grant. So certainly everything Associate Director Wright just said, as well as I would say one of the main things that changed on that particular line was our qualifications and experience. So if you'll just look on page 24, $5.7 million has been attributed to increase in the cost adjustment and teacher qualifications and experience grant. So that reflects higher expenditures as a result of an increase in experience and qualification of our teachers, and we will see a corresponding increase on our expenditure side as well. But that's driving the majority of that increase, that $5.7 million.
Trustee Linton.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. You did mention the funding support for school councils and, the option of the Parents Reaching Out grant. Are you able to tell us how many of the student councils were able to access the Parent Reaching Out grant, and to what amount? How much were they able to access?
Sorry, and through you, Chair. We put out information to our SCCs through our PIC for Parent Reaching Out grants. We get funding from the ministry for that. We had given the opportunity up to $5,000 per school. If every school actually tried to access, we don't have that amount of funds, but right now with the numbers that have been doing more in-person events. We're finding more of our SCCs, particularly those that don't do a lot of fundraising, are able to access that money for parent engagement events, and that happens on an annual basis. And so this year, and there's going to be a presentation next at the board meeting that will share some of that final details, but we had an increase in numbers of parent reaching out grants being supported, and I think there was about 43 schools that had their initiatives presented and provided some funding for, depending on what the requests were for.
So I wonder if you can walk us through the process there. So 43 schools were successful. Were there schools that applied that were not successful?
When they weren't successful, we gave them back some information because there is criteria that needs to be supported. So for example, only 10% of the budget can be spent on food. There are some other criteria with respect to what they're actually doing for parent engagement. So human rights is one, engaging diverse communities another, health and wellness is another. So there was a very big variety of opportunities that were submitted. If they didn't, we reached back out to give them some more ideas to support their application, and then we provided them with the funding when they did that, if they did choose to improve their project. Some of them chose not to because they had some funding that they already had fundraised.
Are there further questions? Are there further comments? Back to Trustee Linton.
Again, sorry. So now I'm on page 38, textbooks, textbook supplies. It's like $20,451,315. Is that purchasing all new books, or does some of that money go to replacing books that have been damaged, didn't get returned? And is there a breakdown of like how much is spent on new versus replacing?
So I don't have a ton of specific detail in front of me this evening. That would be a comprehensive amount, though. So in terms of books and textbooks and library books, that would cover the gamut, as you've suggested. Also would help to support some aspects of the school block budget. And we can provide more detail of the line if you'd like, but that is largely where we've allocated supplies for schools.
Thank you, Chair. I know we kind of touched on EAs in school, and the addition of 50 is definitely needed. I'm just curious as to how do we take the amount of EAs we have plus the new 50 and kind of move them around through our, 100 and some odd schools, as far as, how many do we have in our high schools and how many we have in our elementary schools, because class sizes are bigger, we have lots of schools, and I want to make sure we have all the support that we could possibly squeeze out of this budget to assist with teachers and students, because without the EAs to help on a more regular basis, then it makes school very difficult for students.
And through you, Madam Chair, Superintendent McCauley, would you like to address that?
Thank you, and through you. I appreciate the recognition of the accommodation needs of students and how important an interdisciplinary team is in their support. I'll preface it by saying as well, we have a number of roles that work alongside teachers in classrooms. Educational assistants are one very important group that provides that support, but we also have our ASL interpreters Interveners work directly with students who are deaf and blind, and we have a language acquisition support worker who works with students who are not yet at an ASL proficiency and developing that as their first language. So when we look at student needs within their learning program, we look at all of the roles that tier into their support plan because it's getting the right magic of the experience and qualifications alongside what their accommodation needs are. In terms of the allocation process, so we have a team that sits across both Inclusive Student Services and Family of Schools. Schools submit requests based on individual students, and then the team looks at the overall allocation to each school individually. Within that, we have a foundation of a minimum number of EAs who are attached to each of our special education classes. So it's always a delicate balance between mainstream or regular class support, what we call flex space EAs that go between different grades and classes, and those that support a very specific group of students in a particular program in a school. So for instance, for each special education class, that class is generally funded at 1 teacher and 2 educational assistants, and then through augmentative budget processes such as special incidents portion, we augment. So a lot of our special education classes actually have 3 or 4 educational assistants working within them to meet the needs of the students who have those accommodation needs. So each of our schools, every single school in the district has educational assistance support. That ranges from our smallest school with a 0.5 to some of our larger needs elementary schools can have up to 15, and then our secondaries as well. So from a proportional split, it also depends because in elementary, students travel as a class through their timetable, and as students move through secondary, we see kind of a splinter of those that require that self-contained environment, but also those whose programming needs can be met through voice and choice and differentiation of their course selections. Because particularly as kids get up into the senior grades, they're picking courses of high interest, high drive, and directly attached to their pathways. And so from a district split perspective, we are generally at 2/3 of our EAs working in our elementary schools and 1/3 working in our secondary schools. Again, when you look at the enrollment numbers and you look at kids' pathways, that's a bit of a difference. Heading from this year to next year, the number representing our special education classes in the budget tells the difference, but it doesn't tell the full narrative of change. And so in the speaking notes Monday night, but I appreciate it was probably fast within the delivery, we have adjusted the number of school supports. So our program that's based on language, math, and executive functioning was meant as a temporary class within the model as we build differentiation and universal design. So we saw a few of those close out this June for the senior levels, and we're actually opening 5 new intensive support special education classes, 1 structured learning for kids with primary needs related to autism, 1 elementary developmental program for kids who require medical and self-care wraparound, and 3 practical learning programs, 2 at the elementary level and 1 at the secondary, for students who require that hand-over-hand life skills, work education through to work placement, and now a higher number of our kids going to college. So a bit of a difference there. Every time we open up a special education class, it does pull EA support from our mainstream, but vice versa, that changes outcomes for students too. So it's always a delicate balance based on the students of the district in each year's planning cycle.
Sorry, and through you, Madam Chair, if I can just add, I know a portion of your question, Trustee Arsenault, was about class size. Just for clarification, the ministry does mandate average class size for grades K through 12, and we do, as an accountability mechanism, have to report on that average class size to the Ministry of Education. So to get to an average, there are always highs and lows, I recognize that, but we are limited with the class size we can have because of the compliance requirement from the Ministry of Education.
Thank you to both responders. Moving now to Trustee Cunningham.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, I wanted to say thank you to Superintendent McCauley for that really detailed answer. It actually answered some questions that I have, so I can skip past those. And I wanted to ask about transportation, and specifically on the line, it talks about public transit as well as local priorities and operations. And I didn't know we worked with public transit. I'm curious to hear what a local priority might be, and how that 0.2 million might be spent.
And I'm sorry, Trustee Cunningham, can you point to what page you're speaking to?
It's page 25 of the document and page 18 of the budget.
Thank you. So these are different components of the transportation grant. They're not necessarily components of the grant that we receive. And so school boards may be eligible for public transit, funding for public transit, where school boards support in a meaningful way or have relationships in a meaningful way that allow access to public transit. So our coterminous board has a program, a district program, that they don't provide school bus transportation to, a secondary school program, but they do provide bus passes too. So they probably purchase 350 bus passes a year that they give to their students that live across the district to access that program. Because that is a more meaningful program, they would include that as part of their routing simulation and receive funding specifically for that. We don't have a similar program. We do provide bus passes for a number of students in a number of circumstances, but not consistently or in such a meaningful way. The great majority of our students that are eligible for transportation receive school bus transportation to and from school. Local priorities is exactly that, but in reality, the benchmark funding doesn't always align with the negotiated contract rates with operators, and so local priorities funding often goes to covering the difference between the ministry-funded benchmark and the negotiated rates that we pay to our operators.
Trustee Brown.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I also have a question regarding coordinators and consultants. I know that you can't have everything line by line, but that seems quite broad for such a large amount of money. So I just wanted to find out, it's on page, oh, hold on, I had the page. Come on. Appendix A, expenditure details, page 40. Or 38, I should say. There's two numbers on here. 38 at the top, and then what's at the bottom? 22. 33. No, I've got 33. Oh. Are they on both pages? Okay.
Through you, Madam Chair, the coordinators and consultants is a broad term, and it speaks to positions like facilitators and coaches, as well as their supplies. So there are a host of facilitators and coaches amongst many of the superintendent portfolios, and so I don't have a breakdown here to speak to it, but that's largely what is included in that line.
Are there further questions or supplementals? Trustee Linton.
So, through you, Chair, a breakdown would be great. Again, just as per the coordinators and consultants. I think the theme is, for me anyway, again, lots of big numbers, and it's important to understand where the money is going to be going, so we can either identify to some of those asking us questions that this budget is a responsible budget and going in areas that we see as priorities, or if there's shortcomings as a board, we can try and advocate. So again, just a breakdown of some of these pieces is extremely important. My question is around.
Sorry, if I could address that, Trustee Linden, because I do think I have a quick answer to your request for additional information, as well as Trustee Brown's. If you look on page 43 of your package, 38 in the budget book, there is a section on coordinators and consultants, and it does provide an FTE breakdown of what's included in that role. 117.5 full-time equivalent positions, and provides a little bit more detail of what's included in that line. If that's helpful. And I'm sorry to cut you off, Trustee Linden.
No problem. So I'll get to that, thank you. So in the same vein as my textbooks question, I see same page 38, bottom of page 33, computers, basically around 50 million. So I guess, is that computers for our teachers, or does that include the computers or the laptops, like the Chromebooks across the board? And does that include software?
It does not include software, but that is all of the computer boxes we have in the system. So the one-to-one program for students in grades 7 through 8, the school-based devices for students younger than that, as well as for replacement for staff devices. So that is the purchase of all device hardware for the board.
Can I keep going? Yeah, so my supplemental to that would be, is there a breakdown of how much of that money is going towards like computer replacement or repairs? You know, again, just depending on the amount, if it's significant, are there strategies to decrease how much money we're spending repairing computers, if you've got that breakdown?
I will happily provide that breakdown to trustees, for sure.
Awesome.
Further questions? Trustee Linton. Go ahead.
So again, and it may be in here, so just point us to it. Other non-operating, 2,543,000. Same page 38 bottom. So just what is that? Where does that money go?
That can, depending on the year, can include many different things that don't fit in the other categories, but this year it's an easy answer because there's only one thing on that line, and it's staff on loan. So we have some staff that are seconded to the ministry or potentially other organizations, and including federations, yes. So we would have a corresponding revenue and expenditure. It's an offset, but it appears on its own as other non-operating.
This should be my last question. Okay. So just earlier you spoke to the EAs and the increase, and again, definitely understand the need, and think that was, a great addition. I'm just wondering around if in here, if we've accommodated like the training costs, so now we're increasing by I guess 50 EAs. I'm sure that would increase the amount of training. So what does that look like? Where is it in the budget? Can you point us to it, please, and thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the question and the importance of professional development. Most of the professional development that our educational assistants receive are supported by our own staff, such as psychological services or in partnership with our community partners. The one cost that was factored into an additional line was that every educational assistant is provided with a Chromebook in order to support student access and resource development, and the 50 additional Chromebooks was built into the technology line that you formerly mentioned.
Are there further questions? Are there comments? We will go to Vice Chair Edwards.
And I appreciate all the effort that has been put into the budget, and especially when the government changes a funding model and you have to play the shell game of pushing one envelope, moving one grant into another grant or combining grants and stuff to fit that in a very short time frame for us to understand. And honestly, I swear it's just a confusion game for trustees at times that the ministry puts out there, so that, you know, are a challenge. And I appreciate the amount of work that is put in and the efforts to increase the number of education assistants and training and the and many of the other items that we are not funded for from the Ministry of Education. Like, as said, we've gone where it comes to, they do not really fund the increased costs around computers and computer maintenance of those computers, as well as the whole IT security and branches of that, and I really do appreciate what you've put together. I also want to make a really note that I have to say this, is that every time, you know, I look at the grants around the special education, and especially that I applaud that they went to the new census data, but it's only 1/5, and I can only imagine that if they actually increased it to the actual numbers from 2021, that our budgets would have significantly increased because of the demographic changes in Durham. I mean, from 2006 to 2021, Durham looks extremely different. And so I'm sure we would have had a huge increase, and that they saw that across the province and they realized they couldn't do it. But then we have Census 2026 coming up in a couple of years. So we will still be behind in the amount of support that we need for all our students because of the demographic change and the needs of our schools. So I continue to say thank you for what you do and trying to meet the needs. But again, from a provincial perspective, I can honestly say that we cannot, you know, we just don't have the support that we need. We have increased needs, we have an increased net enrollment, and when we know that at least 1 in 4 or 1 to 3 participate in some sort of ISS services, we're stretched really, really thin. And it really frustrates me when I look at the budget. Yes, it's great numbers, and the ministry keeps on saying we increase this, we increase that, but as you said, 90% of our budget is staffing. And so that includes all the contractual agreements that we negotiated and so forth. That leaves us very little as a board to meet the priorities of our individual boards. And so I just have to say about it, thank you. It's not you, it's not the staff. I appreciate what you do, but I continue to say that, you know, from a provincial point of view, the government needs to start funding education, because we're starting to crack. Boards are really, really having pressures. They've said that all along, and it's going to be even so greater the next few years as our enrollment increases and the needs, the gap increases between the amount of funding that we get per pupil and the needs of the boards. And that's, sorry, it's a rant, but I had to say it. Thank you.
It's quite all right. I'm looking at Shailene, and her hand is up. So Shailene, feel free.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair, through you. I echo much of what Trustee Edwards has just said. I'm sitting here and will be quite honest that I'm incredibly disappointed and frustrated that we find ourselves in a situation where trustees still have so many very foundational questions about how we are maneuvering and understanding and breaking all of these lines down. And I also am well aware that we are at the mercy of a province, but very much feel as though we are, as a board, being strong-armed a little bit here, just because there still are so many questions, there still are so many uncertainties, and absolutely there are still so many needs. And so I very much echo the sentiments that we know staff are working within the confines of what they have. in the same way that I think trustees are looking at this budget and figuring out how we can work within the confines of what we have to do here. But I am not entirely confident that at least I can do that tonight when, despite the Appendix B, which has been incredibly helpful in my understanding, I still feel uneasy and uncertain, and I don't think I could vote in good faith, not being fully confident. And so I'm wondering, Chair, if there would be an appetite perhaps to put forward a motion to defer the actual vote on this, understanding that I know we also have a timeline, but it might actually be in our best interest as a board to ensure we're understanding all the options and pieces of this budget. So I put that out there.
Thank you. I'm going to go to the chair for a response. Not the chair, the director. I'm sorry.
Thank you for that clarification, Chair. To that question, I do understand that trustees have many questions. This is over $1 billion budget. To be quite frank, trying to break down all of the operational lines within the budget is virtually impossible, to be quite honest. The lines that have been provided are essentially the lines that have been provided by the ministry, and the breakdown of how the lines are used are essentially built upon by the historical practice. When it is that we start with the associate director outlining that we have a significant increase in the number of staff that have been applied, and that the large majority of that those resources are actually being directed towards schools. I think that gives some exact numbers to trustees about how it is that these funds are being directed. The other piece is that we have also received some very clear direction from the ministry that don't allow a lot of wiggle room in terms of the interpretation of how it is that some of the funds are to be utilized. So I think that while it is that time might be added, I'm not sure that in the absence of many months that we would actually be able to get to the line-by-line clarification and the complexity of such would elude. That said, we have a deadline by which we need to submit, and it is in fact a fiduciary responsibility of the board to in fact comply with that. So that is a legal responsibility that is required, and in terms of how it is that the operations are broken down, while it is we're happy to take questions in between, I would caution that a delay might be quite untoward and may not be yielding the kind of illumination that you are looking for.
Trustee Cunningham?
Thank you, and through you, Chair, I wonder if I think Associate Director Wright called it a technical version of this budget? Technical papers. You can correct me on what it's called, but I wonder if that document that already exists might answer a lot of the questions that Trustee Pinello alluded to, and I think a lot of us would agree with. There's a lot on here that, not being in finance, I don't even know what questions I should be asking. So I think having that document might be everything that we need to defer this and make a more educated vote on another day. I think the document, it sounds like it already exists.
Through you, Chair, for clarification, it's a technical document that speaks to the funding formula. It doesn't speak to our budget specifically. The only thing I'd add, Chair, is that trustees have had this budget for 3 weeks, and outside of the previous Ed Finance meeting and this meeting this evening, we've received no questions. And so we're happy to answer your questions, but time is of the essence as we're legally obligated to have this passed by the end of June.
Thank you. And yes, time is of the essence. We'll go to Student Trustee Cameron.
Thank you, Chair. Reflecting on what we had learned at our professional development session with our parliamentarian, I can't remember their name, you know, she said that you don't need to know every line of the budget. You don't need to know that these $3 are going to that book, you know, that those, you know, hundreds of dollars are going to this Chromebook. But I think it's about understanding the priorities and making sure that the priorities of the board and our students and our staff are the priorities that are reflected in the budget. And I see that, and I think that's why I am personally comfortable supporting the budget, because I think we're doing the best that we could do with what we have. So.
And I agree. When I looked at, even with the explanations and the appendix, it really does show that the budget does address the areas that we, a strategic plan and our goals. And I also understand the feeling of passing a budget, because not long ago, I'll just say, I used to sit on the other side of the Special Education Advisory Committee, and I used to do presentations to the board. And I started reading the technical paper, and that is no longer called, really, it's called a guidebook or whatever now. But anyways, I did read it to have a fuller understanding of how the fundings went. And it became very, very clear as far as the envelopes are concerned. The second point that was mentioned by Director Camille Williams-Taylor is that we have a fiducial responsibility. One of our primary goals is to pass the budget. And unfortunately, it is a strong-arm tactic. Is that if we don't pass the budget, that's an opportunity for the Ministry of Education to come in and take over the board, because that's one of our primary duties, is to pass the budget. And I know that people say that, you know, well, then maybe that's what we should let them do. But I have seen and I have heard other boards that have been taken over by the Ministry of Education, and believe me, they have not been happy on how they rearrange and they do things and look at things, because they have a bird's eye view, even bigger when people start complaining that, you know, sometimes the people at the board office don't understand what's going in the schools. Try a minister trying to, and even based on some of his comments, understanding the needs of the schools and the local schools. And it's best here that we pass this budget. Yes, it grates that we need more money and we can do a lot more things with more money and so forth, but we have to pass this budget because I could not have, in my good conscience, not pass the budget and have the ministry come in and take us over, and then have their say on how they think that things should be spent in this district. I just cannot. That's not my good conscience. I could do that. So I am going to put the motion forward on the table at this time to pass the budget. And meanwhile, you know, other questions are can be asked, but I want to move that the Finance Committee recommend to the Board of Trustees that the 2024-2025 draft budget containing total revenues of, and near here I'm going to get these numbers mixed up, but I always do, $1 billion, sorry, you say it, because I always get it mixed up.
$1,220,903,513.
Thank you. I keep on forgetting millions. I don't know why. And total expenses of $1,220,903,513 be approved as presented. Sorry. Thank you.
We have a motion on the table. I would like somebody to second that motion. Trustee Thatcher has seconded that motion. We will now have continued questions or comments, and I do see Trustee Linton's hand is up.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I'd like to speak to Trustee Pinello's thought of deferring. Yes, we've had it for 3 weeks, but it's taken 3 weeks of still not being able to understand this. So whereas I appreciate that comment and that sentiment, there is a responsibility. And, you know, we have spoken many a time of when we're out there facing the public, there are questions that's coming out at us. And I would like to feel confident in terms of my responses. So some of the questions that I asked weren't just my questions, there were questions that we'd heard from the general public. And, you know, there are still items to come. I have no doubt that you all have the answers because you've done it. And again, Appendix B is indicative of you being able to do a bit of a deeper dive and provide in-depth answers to some of the questions. And I think that extra time allows you to do that, of which I would feel more comfortable and confident voting for this budget with some of those answers. The other thing that I'm hearing again is the priorities, and I mentioned it earlier this week, of the connection to the multi-year strategic plan. I think as a board, we did a phenomenal job of engaging the community and our parents, especially the diversity that is Durham. But I'm not necessarily seeing the connect between the budget and the multi-year strategic plan, which I think I may see with some of these numbers and these line items fleshed out, which again is why my questions were very specific to, you know, the school council in terms of engaging the community, because we know they're an integral part of this. How are we spending the funds? If we're spending more funds repairing computers than we are buying new computers, then there's an issue, right? So I know there's a motion on the floor. My comment again is I think the additional time is necessary for us to make an informed decision. I understand the pressures of time. We have a few more days. We have called special board meetings in the past. If and when needed, I think you have a committed board that would be willing to come back and have that vote, because we know the impact of not voting on the budget. And I just ask and think that we should consider this in terms of making an informed decision.
Shailene, your hand is up.
Thank you. Through you, Trustee Linton has taken much of what I was going to rebut with, but I do 1000% understand that we have a duty to perform here, and certainly am not disparaging the budget in terms of, does it align with our priorities? Do I see parts of it that are aligned with our strategic plan? Do I think that we're trying to do the best by way of students, staff, and communities who are part of the DDSB community? What I do push back against is, again, the comments around trustees have had this for 3 weeks. Absolutely, we have. But in that time, we have had to understand both what we are seeing in line items and try to understand what that looks like in practice. And to Trustee Linton's point, there have been questions from the community who are also trying to understand what exactly it is that we're voting on and what that actually means for their children in classrooms, what that means for staff in schools. And so to the point again that we're only as good as trustees as we are able to explain what it is that we do here to those who have elected us. And so while our duties are different, and while staff may have all of the answers that we're looking for, because this is your expertise, this is your job, this is your role, many of us are not coming from professional backgrounds where we do education-based funding models. We carry strengths in other areas where we've dealt with other funding models. And so I do challenge those comments a little bit, because I don't necessarily see them as very equitable and accessible, especially when we are dealing with a budget of over $1 billion that is going to have significant impacts on staff, students, and communities. So whether or not this vote gets deferred or is passed tonight in terms of the budget vote, or whether it fails is, again, the will of the board. But in putting that forward, it was not at all in an effort to disparage what's before us, but rather to seek to understand more thoroughly so that we can communicate and share that with communities. And some of the comments that were made following my suggestion, I really do disagree with. Thank you.
Sorry, Madam Chair, may I just quickly first apologize. I'm not sure my comment was taken as intended, and so I could have been clearer. My comment was more along the lines of, we're happy to provide additional information, understanding that we come from different backgrounds. So please don't hesitate to reach out and ask those questions, and we will happily compile and provide the answers to all trustees. So we have two requests for detailed breakdowns of these line items leaving here this evening. Happy to do that and provide more information. If there are other questions trustees have, happy to provide that information.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I just want to build a little bit on what Associate Director has said, simply because the range of the nature of questions that we've received tonight is quite significant. So a question that asks us to explain how the additional 50 staff will be allocated to schools is one that is very clear and it seems to be very related to the allocation of staff that is being added. But that compared to a question about whether we're spending more on repairs or on purchases of Chromebooks is there's a wide gap between the two. And so if that's the gap that we're trying to fill, with all due respect, that becomes difficult for us to contemplate because there are line after line in this budget that if we were to explain the granular detail of every line, that becomes a very difficult undertaking. The other piece of it, of course, is we have no way to predict all of the questions because, again, I think in all of the years I've been a director, some of the questions around, the kind of granularity that's being expected, I've never heard that before. So while it is that we can talk about, how it is that the resources are being deployed, it's very difficult for us to anticipate and undertake the granularity of where every cent will go because it's not a part of necessarily the practice of how it is that we engage to deploy the revenue that we have been entrusted with. So I guess to Associate Director's Wright's point, we would need some clarity around exactly what it is that folks need to know, and if we are in fact able to build that, and in fact if it will be illuminating around how it is that we're supporting the responsible deployment of revenue.
Thank you for that explanation. There is a motion on the floor. It has been seconded. We will go to Trustee Cunningham, and then I will call the vote. Trustee Cunningham?
Sorry, for clarity, are we talking about the budget motion or Trustee Linton and Pinello's request for deferment? Which item is on the floor right now? Motion.
There is not a motion. No.
Nobody has a motion.
No, we have not had a motion to defer, so I'm calling the motion that is on the floor. Are we clear?
Then I will stop because my question was related to the deferral, but in short, I believe we should pass this budget tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to Vice Chair Edwards, and she's going to read that motion again, then we will call the vote.
You're going to kill me, right?
Sorry.
But just before I say is that we have time between now and budget. We're just passing it at the committee meeting. We have time between now and the board meeting to actually get some of those answers and ask staff some of those answers before we actually approve the budget at board. This is committee meeting. And I think that to basically delay this would delay the whole process as well, considering the number of meetings we've had and the number of graduations and stuff that are going in the evening. So we have that opportunity. So the motion that was on the floor is that the Finance Committee recommend to the Board of Trustees that the 2024-2025 draft budget containing total revenue of $1,220,903,513 and a total expenses of $1,220,903,513 be approved as presented.
Thank you for that motion. If you are in favor of that motion, we don't have our green check marks tonight, so I definitely want to see those hands in the air. If you are in favor of the motion. Plus Ben. If you are opposed to that motion. She hasn't voted. 2. So there are 7 in favor, 2 opposed. This motion, and student trustee is in favor. Thank you. That motion has passed. Thank you. Since receiving the core education funding for our next school year on April 26th, our staff have gone above and beyond in developing our draft budget. We also realize that we are a rapidly growing board, and it is our aim to meet the needs of our approximately 80,000 students. We definitely understand the many pressures which our staff have been facing during the last few weeks. We thank you for your very strong efforts. So we thank Associate Director David Wright, and beside David we have Jennifer Machen, Senior Manager of Finance, and behind we have Melissa Durwood, another Senior Manager. We have Kristen Talbot here, we have Lisa Bianca from Facilities, and we know that Andrea McCauley, Superintendent, has done a lot for her programming as well. I thank everybody for their contributions. Thank you. Is there any further business? I'm seeing no other business. Consider this meeting to be adjourned.